Hello and welcome back to Collapse Life. I'm your host, Zahra Sethna. At least a dozen states across the country are moving to ban the sale of new gasoline powered cars by 2035. It's all part of an environmental agenda that aims to reduce carbon emissions. Of course, the plan comes with a lot of questions, not just about the logistical challenge, but also about what's actually motivating this agenda. Today's guest has done a deep dive into the real cost of electric vehicles, among other things. The Honorable Jason Isaac is a fourth generation native Texan who served as state representative for 8 years. Now he's the founder and CEO of the American Energy Institute and a senior fellow with Life Powered, a national initiative of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Jason, thank you for joining us today.
So great to be on, Zara. Thanks for having me.
Great. I'm so excited for this conversation. I just wanted to start. I noticed something in your email signature as we were getting in touch to set this podcast up. So tell us, you call yourself Carbon King. Well, you want to
Yeah,
tell us about that?
it's actually something that I don't call myself. It's something that someone else called me, and I think they meant it as an insult, and I kind of embraced it. And I thought, you know what? I kind of like it. It's my license plates now. I've kind of owned the branding of being labeled what someone thought was a derogatory comment as the Carbon King. My wife made a great costume for me for Halloween last year, and we went as the Carbon King and Carbon Queen. But as I've testified in front of Congress now 4 times, I've mentioned a couple of times that I introduce myself and I say, "Hi, I'm Jason Isaac, and I live a high carbon lifestyle." And I think the rest of the world should too, because places that have high CO2 emissions are truly the best places on the planet. They have clean air, they have clean water, people live longer, healthier lives. This is all powered by affordable, reliable energy. And when I mentioned this, Congressman Raskin from Maryland referred to me as a carbon king. I think this was about a year ago now. And I just loved it. And so I have, not only do I embrace the high carbon lifestyle, I also embrace the moniker of the carbon king.
hmm And that's really what your organization, the American Energy Institute, is about, right? It's promoting the benefits of abundant energy. So you started already. Maybe just go a little step further. Give us your pitch for fossil fuels.
Yeah, it really is. When you look at places that have affordable, reliable energy, people live longer, healthier lives. And what we're seeing happening now is it's happening through Europe is an incredible threat to their industry. Countries like Germany, the United Kingdom, they're deindustrializing because they're embracing this so-called political agenda. It's known as net zero, decarbonization, low emission future, energy transition. Those are all political agendas just meant to separate you and I from our food, our fuel, and our money. And it really boils down to separating us from our freedom. And so the American Energy Institute, we're a new trade organization that represents American energy producers, primarily oil, gas, coal, and nuclear, and those that support free markets first and foremost. And we're unique in that aspect that we truly do support free markets, that we support people from various industries, again, coal, natural gas, oil, nuclear. But we are also unique in the fact that you can't buy your way onto our board. And that's why we're seeing so many other trade organizations that are capitulating to this European World Economic Forum UN agenda and embracing the energy transition and welcoming the government subsidies that you and I as taxpayers are paying for. And all we're getting in return is more expensive energy that's just crushing the least among us. And if anything, we should be producing more energy in America, that we produce more responsibly than anywhere else on the planet, and getting that to people around the world to lift the last few of us out of abject poverty.
Talk about that piece of it being responsibly produced and used, because obviously there are going to be a lot of people out there who are going to say climate change, it's an existential threat. We have to reduce greenhouse gases. So how do you respond to that in a productive way?
Well, it's interesting because people are conflating pollution with emissions, and they're conflating greenhouse gas emissions with pollution. CO2 is not a pollutant. Water vapor is certainly not a pollutant. And it's interesting to note that CO2 it makes up 0.04% of our atmosphere. What makes up a much greater percentage of our atmosphere is water vapor, and water vapor is a much more heat trapping gas in our atmosphere. So if they truly were concerned, they'd be, making everybody buy dehumidifiers, which would be great in certain times during Texas, because I know it's really humid in central Texas and Houston and other places around the state. But it would be just silly to go net zero H2O. But they're not advocating for that. They're advocating for getting rid of a trace gas in the atmosphere that more and more science is showing does not have any impact on a changing climate, that we're actually increasing CO2 emissions because of the heat from the sun. And it's not the other way around. So the sun is causing the warming and CO2 emissions are increasing, not the other way around. But when you look at pollution, and this is something that people just don't understand, the EPA tracks 6 criteria pollutants that in certain concentrations have impacts on human health. And the United States has been a world leader at reducing that pollution. We've reduced that pollution nearly 80% over the last 5 decades. We're world leaders in clean air. And if there's one thing that we learned during the COVID lockdowns was you take half the cars off the road and our air quality didn't improve in this country. And in some cities, it actually got worse. It just shows that we're practically at a natural state and weather impacts our air quality more than anything else. And people just don't know that we're world leaders in environmental protection. And we've been increasing the amount of energy we're producing. We're also number one when it comes to access to clean and safe drinking water.
So this ends up becoming one of those discussions where there's a mountain of evidence, so to speak, on both sides, and you end up just coming to an impasse of like, well, I have my facts and you have your facts, and um, it sort of begs the question: is this just misunderstanding, or is there something more at play? And you kind of touched on it. Is there an agenda that's a purposeful agenda of actually degrowth, of an intentional kind of chipping away at our quality of life and our freedom that we've taken so for granted over the past few decades?
Yeah, this really is a globalist agenda that's being pushed by people at the World Economic Forum, at the UN, at the World Trade Organization, the World Bank. I typically refer to them as self-righteous coastal elites, people that want other people to do without fossil fuels and the benefits that come from hydrogen or hydrocarbons and affordable, reliable energy, but they won't give them up themselves. It's just about controlling every aspect of our lives. It's become a religion for certain people, which is really kind of sad to see that happening. But they are embracing the climate cult, and the Kool-Aid is decarbonization, and the result is the same from the Jim Jones era cult. You drink the Kool-Aid, you die. You embrace net zero, you die. You experience famine. It really is just a political agenda meant to control every aspect of our lives. And when you make energy more expensive, it does crush everyone, and it crushes the least among us more than anything else. And one of my older son is studying energy commerce, and he asked me a couple of years ago. He goes, "Dad, it'd be great if there was a place where a real study had been done that we could see what decarbonization has done to a civilization." And he didn't know it at the time, but there is an example. And I look at Sri Lanka. You can look at Germany, you can look at the United Kingdom and the deindustrialization that's happening there. They're the places with the most expensive electricity in the world in Germany. BASF is leaving Germany, moving their operations to China. They're just exporting jobs. They're not changing demand. But Sri Lanka is really the story where in 2019, you had a candidate running for president, and he billed himself as the world's first net zero candidate on the planet. And so he ran in 2019 and got elected. And that just shows what one person, what one administration in 1 year can do to a country. Because prior to his election, Sri Lanka was exporting tea, they were exporting rice. And when you start to have exporting of goods, you're going to experience wealth. And they were experiencing wealth, they were experiencing prosperity. We're not talking about getting rich and becoming a number one economy overnight, but compared to their closest neighbors like India, they were experiencing growth and prosperity faster than India is. And within 1 year, the president got elected, and he said, "We're going to ban the use and importation of nitrogen or fossil fuel based fertilizers."
Mm.
And what happened is food production decreased 40%, cost increased 80%. They're no longer exporting tea and rice. And today in Sri Lanka, there are 9 in 10 people that face hunger on a daily basis, not 1 in 10. It's 9 and 10 because of the policies from one person, from one administration that embraced the cult like fascination with decarbonization. And keep in mind, when he was elected in his first year and a half in office, Sri Lanka had the highest ESG rating of any country out there. Shows what a scam that is. Elon Musk is right. ESG, this environmental, social, and corporate governance scoring is a complete scam. But
Hmm.
when he fled Sri Lanka, when his palace was overrun, he didn't go to places like Malawi and Ethiopia that live at net zero on a daily basis. He went to Singapore in a fossil fueled private military plane. And he went to Singapore, which is the highest per capita CO2 emissions on the planet. It's a great place. I've been to Singapore. The air is amazing, the water is amazing, and the food's really good too.
Amazing. That's an incredible story. How did your son react when you gave him that example?
He was shocked, but he wasn't surprised. But he's glad that he has this information in his belt, because he likes to speak about these things, and he's participated in conferences before as a teenager, and now he's in his early 20s, still
Mhm.
studying energy commerce at Texas Tech, and actually this summer he's working in the oil field in the Permian Basin. So it's
Amazing.
really exciting. He's getting some great hands-on experience and learning. He's filling me in every day, and I'm learning from him. It's really exciting to see that. But he understands the connection between access to affordable, reliable energy and human flourishing. And his goal, like mine, is to eliminate poverty around the world. And you do that with energy.
And so his goal and his passion for this isn't that dissimilar from other people in his generation who have really bought into the whole climate agenda. And I want to kind of tie this back to the electric vehicles that we mentioned at the top in the introduction. Electric vehicles have somehow become the kind of key to unlocking this beautiful, clean future, and the key to saving Mother Earth, so to speak. And so, um, the regular internal combustion engine has been completely demonized, and you recently did a report that kind of debunked the whole idea of um, how efficient and how affordable electric vehicles are. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think you've had this younger generation of people that thought they could buy their virtue signal vehicles and let people know that they cared about the environment. And that's why they were buying an electric vehicle. They were a little bit more expensive. Obviously, these are wealthy people. I think it's over 80% of electric vehicle owners make over six figures a year. We're seeing a larger percentage of people that are buying them are using them as a third vehicle. So this is basically a fancy golf cart where they're using it to get on short commutes back and forth to the grocery store, or short places like that, doctor's visit. They're not using it for their daily commutes. They're not using it for family trips. If they are, it turns out to be a complete nightmare. We've heard story after story. But and then after a few years, they find out that they've got to replace the batteries and how expensive that is. And the cost benefit analysis just isn't there unless you're a wealthy individual and this is your
Mhm.
third little toy car. So I think the younger generation is waking up to the realization that maybe they were duped about this. And I've published other research and reports that show how many kids are working in the Congo. And there's 40,000 kids today working in the Congo mining cobalt using their hands. It's called artisanal mining. It sounds fancy, but it's not by any means at all. There's no safety precautions. There's no hard hats. There's no safety goggles. They're using small hand tools. And really, you shouldn't have 4 to 13-year-old kids working in these dangerous mining conditions where they collapse and people are just completely lost and suffocated. But 40,000 kids a day working in these Chinese owned and controlled mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's nothing democratic or republic about it. But they are essentially child and slave labor.
Mhm.
And then when you learn about the cost, and I think the younger generation doesn't necessarily like corporate welfare or government handouts, but the research that I published with the Texas Public Policy Foundation showed that for every electric vehicle sold in 2021, there was nearly $50,000 in subsidies. So that includes the $7,500 tax credit from the federal government. But then the states have also credits and subsidies available that average about $2,000 per vehicle. But the big one is the corporate average fuel economy, these credits. And EVs, we expose this illegal multiplier that electric vehicles get. So if an EV gets 65 miles per gallon, you just multiply that times 6.67. And so they're getting just under 500, a little over 400 miles per gallon in credits. And this is where nearly $2 billion of revenue for Tesla came in 2021, is selling those credits. They wouldn't have been profitable, likely would not have been profitable if it was not for selling these credits. And they're selling them to Ford and GM and other automobile manufacturers to meet the corporate average fuel economy requirements. Now, what the current administration is proposing is nearly 50 miles per gallon, which essentially is an electric vehicle mandate across every single manufactured car sold in this country. It is That's what it is. And so these credits are costing, and you add all these credits up, it's nearly $50,000 per electric vehicle sold, which is crazy to think. You look at like the Ford Lightning truck that costs $92,000 and it's losing over $90,000 per one produced. And then you add the $50,000 in subsidies. These vehicles' true cost is well over $200,000. And no one would pay that. I mean, not maybe you have a few people that would pay that because it'd be a luxury toy, but it's just a lot of money, and that's why people aren't buying them. But who's subsidizing them? The taxpayers, the
Yeah.
buyers of internal combustion engines, and even the shareholders. Ford would have doubled its profit last year had it not been for their losses in their EV division.
Mhm.
And that means shareholders are on the hook. But you look at some of the largest institutional investors of Ford, it's companies like BlackRock that are telling Ford to embrace this energy transition and move in this direction at the complete detriment of the shareholders, people like teachers, firefighters, police officers, municipal employees who have their pension funds within New York and
Right.
California that are entrusted to BlackRock to manage to produce a return on investment. And when your profits are cut in half because of losses, that is not good for shareholders.
Mhm. And the subsidies, as often happens with subsidies, tend to actually benefit higher incomes rather than lower incomes, even if they're designed to try and help people in the lower end of the scale. Um, and
That's
as
exactly
you
right.
mentioned, the sticker price on these vehicles is not something that most people can afford, um, in spite of the tax breaks.
I was just saying, it's over $60,000 a vehicle. And not only are the electric vehicles getting more expensive, they're increasing the cost of gasoline and diesel vehicles
Right.
because of the corporate average fuel economy credits.
And now we're moving towards mandates, as you said. They're making it so that there's really no option. Gas powered cars that are already on the road can stay on the road for now, but we don't know for how much longer. So this is a real boondoggle.
It really is. I mean, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, was one of the first to come out and say we're banning the sale of internal combustion engines. When what most people don't understand is, oh, that's fine. California can do whatever they want. It's really not going to impact me. But it really does, because there are 17 other states in the District of Columbia that have adopted California's air quality requirements. So essentially, as soon as California comes out and changes their regulations and their requirements, it applies to 17 other states and the District of Columbia. And that's why Governor Youngkin in Virginia just recently announced that they're going to pull out of this California agreement, because you're basically Californiizing every other state in the country. And so it's great to see leadership like Governor Youngkin pulling out of this agreement to follow California's regulations, because it just crushes the absolute least among us. People are driving their cars longer today than ever before because they can't afford to buy new cars. They can't afford to buy used cars when there's safer, better technology available today that should be cheaper, but it's not because of the forced regulations from the federal government and the state of California.
Right. But we are starting to see the market respond, aren't we? So Hertz, for example, found that operating EVs was actually more expensive than traditionally powered cars, so they dumped a ton of them, and people are just not buying them as much as the government would like them to. So, is there starting to be an actual pivot away from pure EVs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every major manufacturer has cut their forecast of the number of EVs that they're projected to produce. So those numbers have come down significantly because they're realizing that they're losing a significant portion of money. You have companies like Toyota, who the chairman has come out and said that for every electric vehicle he makes, the components that are used in that EV, these rare earth elements, there's other elements, the materials that go in there, they could be used to produce 66 hybrid electric vehicles like the RAV4 and other hybrid vehicles that Toyota has. I know the RAV4 is the most popular one. But those would actually, and he says, if you're, and I'm not concerned about emissions reductions. Again, that's things like CO2 and water vapor, things that are necessary for life on Earth. But if you're concerned about pollution, that would actually reduce pollution. It would actually reduce emissions, and it would get better fuel economy. So the cost benefit analysis for hybrids is there over pure EVs, but they're being forced down this path. So it's nice to see some leadership at companies like Toyota that are standing up and speaking out against the absurdity of this all EV push. But the market is responding. Yes, Hertz had bought 100,000 Teslas. They're dumping 20,000 of them. And Tesla lowered the price of that particular model. So Hertz is just taking a beating. I believe their CEO is no longer the CEO of it because of this failed experiment. But the consumers just don't want them. When you rent a car, you typically want range. You want to be able to get around and see the sights. The Biden administration had promised at the beginning of the administration to build 500,000 electric vehicle chargers. There was $7.5 billion set aside in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really the Inflation Reproduction Act. All it's doing is making more inflation. To date, they've built seven chargers with $7.5 billion, kind of missing their guess of 500,000 by just a little bit.
Yeah. Now, a lot of this was driven by the ESG agenda, as you said. Companies like Hertz not wanting to take the risk that their ESG score would backfire on them. And now we're starting to see a little bit of a backing away from that as well. Although our concern is that it's not really backing away, it's just going away. It's going to be rebranded by some other name and then come back. I mean, this is a very strong pull, this agenda. So what's your take on ESG, where we are, what's going on, and what's going to come next?
Yeah, this is something that I've been working on since I think late 2019. I had just left the Texas legislature after serving 4 terms and was working at the Texas Public Policy Foundation and hearing from energy producers that they were being denied access to capital because of ESG. And I was like, what's ESG? This 5 years ago, I didn't know what it was myself. And they said, well, it's this crazy scoring, but because we're in the oil and gas business, and some banks and financial institutions will just come right out and say, you're in the oil and gas business, and we can't loan you money anymore because we have to decarbonize our portfolio, which is absolutely absurd. This cult-like fascination with decarbonization is just terrible. It doesn't do anything to mitigate a changing climate, it just makes everything more expensive. But so these banks were denying access to capital. I'm like, they can't do that. That's illegal. And now here we are several years later, and Congress agrees with me. Over 20 attorneys general agree with me. We've published research papers on this at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. But I helped write a bill in 2020 that ultimately passed in 2021 when the legislature was in session in Texas that says if you boycott, divest, or sanction fossil fuels, that you can no longer do business with the state of Texas. And that bill became law in 2021. 4 additional states passed it in 2022: Oklahoma, Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. Kentucky with a Democrat governor. In Texas, it had broad bipartisan support. People don't want people discriminating against energy producers in this state. And that's exactly what banks and financial institutions were doing. And it has had a tremendous impact on these financial institutions, both financially and the way they message things now. Earlier this year, our State Board of Education in Texas, they oversee the Permanent School Fund, or the Permanent School Foundation, which manages over $50 billion in primarily oil and gas revenue. It's from the land that the state owns that goes in to fund our public education. And $8.5 billion of that was entrusted with BlackRock. Well, BlackRock was on the boycott list. And so a year ago, staff had recommended that the state divest that $8.5 billion from BlackRock. That happened earlier this year. Aaron Kinsey, our chairman of the State Board of Education, made that decision based on staff recommendations. And they withdrew that money from BlackRock and placed it with companies that don't discriminate against responsible American energy producers. And the returns are proving on these ESG funds that they're not a good investment. I testified in front of Congress late last year to this fact, in front of Jason Smith's committee, that this was these ESG investments have really not played out. They've had, I think at the next time, a negative 0.2% return when the NASDAQ and S&P had a 19 and 25% positive return. And that's the kind of return on investment that you should see. You shouldn't see a negative 0.2%
Right.
return. But now BlackRock, and they won't use the term ESG anymore, but so many companies are bought in. I mean, they have trade organizations on the energy side that teach people how to implement ESG. And it's like, I have a board member, and I love to quote, Winston Churchill when he was talking about an appeaser as someone that feeds the crocodiles, hoping they'll be the last one eaten. And I like to say at the American Energy Institute, we don't feed the crocodiles, we wear them. There's so many organizations out there that are feeding the crocodiles. They're just trying to appease people when they truly need to stand up. And so I'm hoping our trade organization helps those organizations stand up for their true beliefs and back away from these political agendas like decarbonization and net zero and ESG and DEI.
Yeah.
It's had an impact at BlackRock, the world's largest financial institution. They don't use the term anymore. Larry Fink had mentioned conscientious capitalism, I think is the term that he's using. They need to just stick with fiduciary duty and
Yeah.
fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah. The economic argument is a really strong one. It's so black and white, and it's an easier one. And when we are seeing, I think a lot of the crumbling of these agendas is coming from moves like pulling money out, and that hurts the bottom line. The social piece is a harder one, isn't it? So that's where you know there's just such an emotional attachment that becomes harder to reason with, as we were talking about earlier, where people come with piles of facts on either side, but there's this emotional pull, this tension um, that I think going to be the harder one to overcome. Are you looking at that at all?
Yeah, maybe not so much from the Texas public policy situation, but from my work, I do. And I was looking at congressional testimony. I think it was yesterday that Matt Gaetz was interacting with a gentleman that is a manager at CalPERS, the California largest pension in California. CalPERS had actually published a report that showed their DEI hires, their investments performed worse than non-DEI hires. That diversity, equity, inclusion, or as some people call it, didn't earn it, falls under the S, the E, and the S and ESG, that social portion where you've got to have people not based on the merits. It's essentially hiring people based on the color of their skin, it's racism at its absolute worst, and it's not performing well for those pensioners, the millions of people that are going to need those pensions, that are preparing to have those pensions available for them when they retire. And that is all being jeopardized because of this weaponization and politicization of capital.
Mhm. Talk about Life Powered. That's the campaign we mentioned in the intro from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And your goal is to raise people's energy IQ. Is that right?
Yeah, the Life Powered initiative at the Texas Public Policy Foundation is this national initiative to raise America's energy IQ. We work with policymakers, the general public, and I think some of the greatest work that the Life Powered initiative is doing is working on public education, this curriculum. About 5 years ago, we worked with a school district to change the state's standards to really remove a lot of bias. There's so much negativity that's really alarming kids. And I think that's why the polls show that over 50% of the kids in America today suffer from eco-anxiety.
Mhm.
You may have seen it at the congressional baseball game. People storming the field. They're wearing these shirts made out of fossil fuels that say ban fossil fuels. They're holding these banners. You're seeing old, wealthy white individuals with neoprene knee braces made out of fossil fuels, storming the field last night at the game and protesting. It's completely hypocritical. These people are suffering from mental anxiety. They're suffering from, I call eco anxiety or eco dysphoria. They're completely depressed about a wonderful environment, about how the life expectancy is so much better. Health outcomes are improved. People's comprehension is improved because of the abundance of affordable, reliable energy. And so we've removed a lot of bias in the textbooks and in the curriculum that kids are learning in Texas. I think this is some of the best work that we're doing. And you can learn more about that at lifepowered.org. Support the work, learn more about the curriculum. We publish this stuff at Classroom Powered. There's a Substack called Classroom Powered where we publish this curriculum for teachers. The most important thing is it aligns with the state standards. My time in the legislature, I learned about technology companies saying we need more programmers and engineers. And I'm like, well, what are you doing to help get the schools in this path? And they say, well, we give them devices, we give them computers, we give them curriculum. And I remember asking a question. I think I was in a Silicon Valley meeting with tech companies. I said, does your curriculum align with the state standards? And they're called TEKS in Texas. It stands for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, TEKS. And they're like, what are the TEKS? And I'm like, well, that's your problem. You've got to have the curriculum aligned with the standards so the kids are learning things that they're going to get tested on at the end of the year so you can see advancement. Because teachers today just don't have time to willy-nilly teach things that aren't on the standards, that don't meet the standards. And our curriculum does, and it removes the bias, teaches kids unbiased things about all forms of energy produced in this country. It teaches a cost-benefit analysis. So I think that's just some of the most transformational work that we're doing, that we're going to eliminate eco-anxiety within our youth today, and that's going to bear the fruit and the shade of the seeds that we planted 5 years ago, probably 10 to 15 years from now.
What are some examples? What do you think are the biggest sort of aha moments that you find when you're, sharing these curricula?
Well, teachers, and we do a summer energy institute, typically in the Permian Basin out in Midland, and we'll bring 20 teachers out every summer and have them spend 4 or 5 days visiting with people that work in the energy production, whether it's oil, gas, coal. They'll get to go to tour a refinery, tour a drilling rig, and every day is an aha moment. Like, I had no idea that happened. I had no idea that you were reusing the gas to produce more oil rather than flaring it. This regasification that companies are doing now, because it's more affordable for them. The cost benefit analysis is there. So there's just so many things people don't understand. And I joke about this quite often in my talks, that Lululemon pants. I mean, yes, they're not the yoga pants. They do make men's pants. I love them. They're great. They're made out of neoprene, which is made out of polypropylene, which is made from production of oil and gas.
Hmm.
So the plastics that we enjoy in our daily lives, the products that we enjoy in our daily lives, people just don't understand where they come from. And so time I meet with someone, they say they want to ban fossil fuels. And I say, well, you first. I mean, go live with the Amish for a couple of weeks. You wouldn't make it a couple of days. But even they use products made from fossil fuels. But over 96% of the products that we use on a daily basis are made possible because of hydrocarbons. The food that we consume is brought to us typically on a truck that's produced with, fueled by hydrocarbons. Those are some of the aha moments that people just don't truly understand the goods in their daily life and where they come from. And just coming back from places that are undeveloped, that don't have affordable, reliable energy, and spending a week on places with barely any air conditioning at all, with any access to electricity. It was so nice to be back in the United States and get to experience air conditioning. Central air was just wonderful, because where I was for a week, there was no central air, and it was very hot and very humid. And that's why we live longer, healthier lives in this country.
Yeah. There's no doubt that the comfort and convenience that we have in our society is thanks to abundant energy. But at the same time, is there an argument to be made that it has led to wild overconsumption and just kind of us taking so for granted the abundance, and that it will always be there, that we haven't moderated our behavior in such a way that's responsible? Is that a valid argument? Do you have any response to that?
Yeah, I think you could say the abundance has led to some people becoming lazy because they just don't have to work as physically hard as they have. And then you overeat because there's food that's available. We're producing enough food for 10 billion people on this planet. and we're using a lot less land to produce that amount of food than we did 100 years ago. Today, there's more trees in the United States than there were 100 years ago. These are good things, in my opinion. But yeah, we're producing more food than there are for people. And so I think that's why some of the climate agenda is moving towards attacking food production, because they really want there to be fewer people on this planet. I mean, Jane Goodall has said as much in front of the World Economic Forum. She thinks that the planet is sustainable with a population that we had in the 1500s. That's a 95% reduction from where we are today. I am not a Malthusian. I want people to go forth and multiply, bring a blessing to this country and to this world, because we have enough food, we have enough energy. Abject poverty in the last 50 years has come down from 50% of the world's population to today below 10%. A couple of years ago, we were at about 8%. The numbers ticked up a little bit as the cost for energy increase, as people are demonizing fossil fuels and hydrocarbons and nuclear energy. The costs are starting to increase. And so unfortunately, people are moving back into poverty. But yeah, I would say the convenience has probably resulted in some rising cases of obesity in this country, and this just clear abundance, and the food that we consume is heavily processed.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm certainly mindful of. But the convenience, the healthcare that we have access to, again, we are, compared to people who live in Malawi, we live 20 years longer life expectancy, and that is just fascinating to me. That to know that we get to meet, our third and sometimes fourth generation because of our abundance of energy that's making this great healthy life available for us.
Yeah, no doubt. The idea that there is a degrowth agenda and a depopulation agenda that is very much tied to this climate propaganda is so clear. It's certainly so clear to us and probably to many of our viewers. There might be some people who are just starting to see through the cracks, though. So how do you engage with an audience like that? What advice do you have for those people as they start to sort of see through the climate haze and tamp down that eco anxiety?
Well, anytime I get an opportunity, and I did this just a few weeks ago, I took legislators from Texas that serve in the Texas House. I took several, I think we had 6 women legislators representing various parts of the state. And we did a Midland energy tour. And we spent the day touring gas processing facilities, of a location that was doing high pressure hydraulic fracturing or fracking, and then into an oil rig. And we were only allotted a certain amount of time, and they went way over their time because they were really enjoying talking with the workers out there and learning more about how responsibly we produce energy in this country. They loved it. I ate it up. I thought it was wonderful too. So any opportunity I get to tell people about the energy industry and get to experience it firsthand, I jump at that chance. The two biggest messaging movers that move people to that may be anti-hydrocarbons, or maybe they're just somewhere in the middle, and they've kind of fallen in line, like, oh yeah, we need a low emission future. Like, no, we don't. They just don't know. They don't pay attention. Those people, I call them the movable middle. So you've got your people that are really on the left, movable middle. The two messaging points that move them to embrace, I don't know if they'd come out and say they embrace the high carbon lifestyle, but they embrace affordable, reliable energy and produce an American energy, is when you talk about how expensive energy hurts the poor. And the regulations that are being proposed now do nothing to mitigate a changing climate. I share the facts and the data with them about how our atmosphere is 0.04% CO2. And the models that the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change uses show that if we reach net zero by 2050, that the temperature differential by 2100 is less than 1/10 of 1 degree using their models. If you do it globally, it's less than 2/10 of a degree. So it does nothing. Using their models, it does nothing to mitigate a changing climate. It just makes everything more expensive. And you look at a lawsuit that's going on in California right now, it's called the 200 versus the California Air Resources Board. It's over 200 civil rights organizations. These are people that are typically on the left that wouldn't necessarily ideologically align with me or the Texas Public Policy Foundation or American Energy Institute. They're suing the state, saying they're violating the Civil Rights Act because their environmental policies have a disparate impact on communities of color. Between 2021 and 2022, there was a 30% increase in people that had their electricity disconnected in the United States, a 76% increase in people that had their natural gas utility, disconnected in the United States. Expensive energy hurts the poor here at home in the United States, but it also hurts people around the world. The UNICEF reports that 3.8 million people will die this year from lung illnesses attributed to indoor air pollution because they're cooking with animal dung and other forms of biomass to heat up water to make it somewhat potable. They're still dying of malaria and these things that are unheard of in the United States. And also, UNICEF reports that today women will spend over 200 million hours walking to collect water because they don't have access to affordable, reliable energy. They don't have access to the water treatment that we take for granted here in the United States. And to me, that's a human rights violation when you have these globalist organizations that will deny access to funding for these third world countries if they're investing in infrastructure based on fossil fuels. I think that's it's a human rights violation. It's appalling. But the other messaging point is that, and I mentioned this earlier, is that people don't understand that we're world leaders in clean air in this country and number one when it comes to access to clean and safe drinking water, as we've produced much, much more energy and started exporting that energy around the world. We need to be exporting more propane and natural gas and oil to countries around the world to lift that last 9% of the global population out of poverty, because that is truly the key. And so those are the messaging points that really move people to coming over to embracing this American energy.
What about solar and wind, though, as replacements for fossil fuel?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is something that we've studied extensively at the foundation. In 2021, we had another perfect example to look at what happens when you become too dependent on variable, alternative, unreliable forms of electric generation, namely wind and solar. We were 33% of our grid in Texas in 2021 when wind and solar production dropped to 1.5% of their installed capacity. We had over 700 people that lost their lives from freezing temperatures, from indoor pollution because they were burning their furniture. They were burning things inside their homes to try to stay warm. Wind and solar completely failed. And there's no reliability requirement for wind and solar. And that's what we need. We need to be able to count on the electricity when we need it, not when the weather cooperates. And we're seeing this play out in Germany has been the worst, if you will, with their energy transition. They've completely embraced it. And it's really funded and fueled by China and Russia because they're the primary beneficiaries of higher cost of energy. They're making the solar panels, the wind turbines, the blades. These things are not recyclable. They take up a lot of land. And so they've really let people down. And it's unfortunate now in Texas that our grid is now 40% this variable alternative generation, and they still don't have a reliability requirement. They're so heavily subsidized by the federal government. People say that wind and solar are cheaper. They're absolutely not. Everywhere that they continue to grow, I refer to them as a parasite on the grid because they are, and they're destroying the host. Everywhere they grow, cost increase. And they still need massive amounts, billions of dollars of subsidy. When you look at the energy equivalent or the subsidies, because people say, oh, fossil fuels get millions and billions of dollars of subsidies too. But when you look at the energy equivalent, natural gas is 39 cents per megawatt of hour of electricity generated. Solar is over $80 and wind is over $24. Of subsidy. That's you and I as taxpayers paying more to subsidize unreliable variable forms of alternative energy. We really have got to stop the production tax credit at the federal level and start to pull back some of the subsidies that states have offered as well and level the playing field. And that's why to the American Energy Institute, you look at our website, it's free markets, American energy. And so we support ending subsidies, even those that some of our members may be benefiting from.
Mhm.
We want to level the playing field and support free markets.
Talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing with the American Energy Institute.
Yeah, I had an opportunity at a congressional roundtable recently to participate and talk with members of Congress, and there was other trade organizations that were there that were present. And it was interesting because I got to tell them stories of Sri Lanka, which other people weren't talking about. They were talking about the energy transition and decarbonization and low emission future, these things that are just political agendas that are catchy buzzwords that sound good, that really just make energy more expensive. But I got to close the conversation by saying that we are unique in the fact that you can't buy your way onto our board, and that we actually are probably the only trade organization that advocates for policies that would reduce the cost of energy, that would reduce the cost of a barrel of oil. And not many companies, especially the global multinational companies, want that to happen. They like high cost energy, they like higher revenue, higher profit margins. And we are advocating for humanity and the consumer over the bottom line. And
Mm,
what you'd see was an abundance of produced American energies. Again, you would see lower cost, and that's just going to help everybody on the planet. And that's the good thing. That's the right thing to do, in my opinion. And so we're proud to do that. And that's kind of where we differentiate ourselves from other trade organizations.
that's great. Um, Before we let you go, are there any final thoughts, anything that I didn't ask you that you want to make sure the audience knows?
No, I would just continue to tell people to embrace the high carbon lifestyle and hope the rest of the world gets to do the same. I know it's kind of funny, sounds funny, but we are truly blessed with abundant energy in this country. And really, if you have an opportunity to travel to places that don't, because that is where you truly learn. I'm blessed that I get to travel a lot for my work. I get to go to other states. I get to go to other capitals. I get to spend time in the swamp in DC. But I also get to go to third world countries where people that don't have access to energy, and it really help opens my eyes. Imagine if a woman in Africa could get access to a little propane cooktop, something that people here in the United States use for camping would be transformative in her life. It would free an hour a day just in the time that she spends to collect animal dung and biomass to heat up water to make it somewhat potable. But that would just be life changing for her. The energy is the key to ending poverty around the world, and we really need to embrace that. And that's the policies that we should be advocating for, that really lead to ending poverty, not increasing it.
Hmm. Absolutely. Just tell people how they can find you if they want to learn a little bit more about you and what you do.
Sure, you can follow me on X at Isaac for Energy or AmericanEnergyInstitute.com, or you can find me on Substack. It's jasonisaac.substack.com. I publish pieces there about once a week just to help people with messaging and research. And so that's where you can find us.
That's fantastic. Well, we're so grateful that you took the time to come and talk to us about this. And we wish you the best of luck and hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
Absolutely, Zara. I love it. Thank you so much. You do a great job. Keep up the great work.
Thanks so much. Well, viewers of Collapse Life will know that this channel is all about opening eyes and offering practical solutions. And we're so grateful for guests like Jason to come on and share their perspectives every week. But we need your help to do more. Help others find this information by liking this video and hitting the subscribe button and share it with people you know. Collapse Life is a thinking person's guide to civilization and demise, and we're so happy that you're here with us. Be sure to follow us on Substack as well at collapselife.substack.com and find us on Twitter at collapse_life. And then head on back here next week for another episode of this podcast. We've got another great guest lined up, and we look forward to seeing you then. Until then, keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.